All right, hi all, welcome to the tutorial Space Using Vector Assets to Build a World. So you're going to be introduced to using stock vector images in addition to a stock photo image to create a world to immerse your viewer in. We are going to be making a video as our media asset that gets exported this time. So you have two files that you need to download. By the way, this top tutorial here is going to look a little different when you're actually looking at this. This is an older tutorial, but this is the new one. So you have two links to follow here. One is the Space Vector Assets. You are able to download this for free. This is a free license. So go ahead and hit download now. What you're going to get is a zipped file like this from the site Vecteezy. There are several vector asset sites like this. This is the one I use. It's my go-to. The second asset that you need to download is a space photo from Pexels. So you can go ahead and download that here. And it is going to download for you. Okay? So you need to have those two files ready to go. These are my two go-to sites. There are other sites like them, but just so you know, there's great resources on these sites for free assets to use, especially for educational purposes. So I'm going to go ahead and close those out, and I'm going to minimize that. And what I want to do here is get organized really quick. So I'm going to start a new folder, and I'm going to call it Space. I'm going to go ahead and put my assets in there. Now you have a zipped folder here for your vector assets. Of course, you just need to double click that to extract it, or you can right click to uncompress, right click to extract on a PC. So I'm gonna go ahead and dump these both in here. And I'm gonna get rid of the zip file because I don't need it anymore. Okay, so if we go into the Vecteezy folder, this is the first thing we're going to do. So we're going to jump into Illustrator. Some of you are familiar with Illustrator from other classes you've had or work that you've done on your own. Some of you aren't. So I'm going to go over how to export these assets, but this might be familiar territory to some of you. So we're going to go to the EPS file. Now, just so you know, Illustrator can open AI files, which is Adobe Illustrator. They can also open an EPS and an SVG file, I think it is. I might be messing up the order of the letters there. So just so you know, you get those three different types of files from a stock vector site, and Illustrator can open all those. So I'm gonna go ahead and wait for that to launch. And when you're using other vector assets that are stock from a site, you never really know how they're going to be organized. And one thing I want to make totally clear, this happens a lot, make sure you're opening the EPS or SVG or the AI file, because in these vector assets files, they also include a JPEG, which is a little bit misleading. And if you open the JPEG in Illustrator, it's not going to let you do anything because it's not actually vector assets. So if you're opening this up and when you open your layers panel and you don't see anything like this, you just see one layer, you probably opened up the JPEG file by accident. All right, so the groups in this particular vector file are really nice. I don't want to complicate things, but sometimes when you download these files from another artist who's created them, sometimes these are not organized at all, and it can get really messy. So this is a nice clean one, but just know that if you download one and it's a big mess in how it's organized, you have some organizing work to do, which if you're not familiar with Illustrator, it'll be hard to do, or you might just want to find another file, kind of depending on what's going on. You can always reach out to me for help with that, by the way. So in the layer, we have all these different groups, and look at that. They're so nicely organized. Lucky us. So what we're going to do is export some of these. It can be whatever of your choice. I'm not going to export all of them. I'm going to probably export maybe 5, but you can use whatever ones you want from this particular example. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is export the rocket ship because it's pretty awesome. I do kind of want to see how big this artboard is out of curiosity. So I'm going to go over, your tool panel is right here, and I'm not going to get too much into the interface of Illustrator. Hopefully you've had a little bit of experience. If not, you're still going to be okay. In the tools panel towards the bottom, there's this little square with like a cross section on the top left corner. This is your artboard tool. So I'm going to click that. You're going to see this line around the artboard selected. I'm just going to check out the properties. And I see that this is 800 pixels by 560 pixels. So it's really not that big of an artboard. And I'm not too worried about that. It's just that when I export these assets, I might use a little higher resolution when I do that. So we'll go through that in just a minute. So I'm going to go back to my selection tool at the top. I'm going to select this rocket ship, and we are going to export this out of Illustrator with a transparent background. So it's going to be a PNG file, which you're already familiar with, right? So what we're going to choose is actually export selection. And you're going to get a dialog box, export for screens, which is what we're doing. It's going to go into a screen. I'm going to click the folder icon. And I'm going to tell it that I just want it to go into the space folder. I don't need it to go back into the VectEasy folder. So you really don't need to worry about anything here. But what I want you to choose is that it has a scale of 500 ppi. And you might not see that as an option. You can just click on it and type that in there. So I would use 500. The suffix is what it's going to be called. So I'm just going to call it space. Or I guess I could be really specific and say rocket. That's probably a better way to go. And then you want to make sure that it is just a PNG. We don't need to get into any other file types. We're going to export the asset. And what you'll see popping up in your folder is a rocket asset that has transparency. And we're going to be able to take this into After Effects now and use it as an animation asset. There are other ways to use Illustrator files directly in After Effects, where you can just import an Illustrator file and animate straight from that. But because this is Motion Design Foundations and we want to keep things a little bit simple, we're not going to get into that for this particular tutorial. I want to make sure that you get a, with animation and design, there's many different ways to do the same thing. So I want to make sure we're getting lots of different ways of doing the same thing. So I'm going to go ahead and export a couple planets here. So I'm going to go to File, Export Selection. I'm going to call this a moon because it kind of looks like a moon. Everything else is the same. All my settings, export that. I'll do one more planet. And this one I'll just call planet. I think I need to do a moon because what is space without a moon? Which it's kind of funny that there's a crescent moon out in space because that's not really possible. The crescent moon only appears to us on Earth like that, right? I do believe I need a space alien ship. So I'm going to export that. So yeah, why don't you just pick about 5 things to export. And here I have my 5 things. So we'll call that good, just for simplicity's sake. Okay, so you can either close this or minimize it or just quit Illustrator. You don't need to save anything. We didn't do anything to the file. And now I have all my assets for this little world that I'm going to create. So we'll go ahead and launch After Effects, and this time we're going to do it differently, where we are going to set this little piece of video up for video, an animated video, instead of the animated GIFs that we've been doing. And then what we're going to do is I'm going to show you how to compress your video through Adobe Premiere. So here we go. I'm going to do a new project. New composition, we'll call it Space. This time we're going to do a 16:9 aspect ratio, which is pretty standard for online streaming. So for the width, I want you to type in 1920. And then for the height, it's 1080. And I can only just tell you that in such a way because I have it memorized from years and years of doing this. Frame rate, we'll keep it 24. 24 is a really good frame rate for online streaming of content. The lower frame rate, as opposed to like a 29.97 that you might get from television, helps it buffer and play to your viewers online a little bit better. And then let's go for 10 seconds on this. Okay, so 1920 by 1080, 24 frames, 10 seconds. Go ahead and hit OK. All right, so now this is a good time to save your project. I'm going to call it, guess what? Space. It's going to go into my Space folder. I'm going to go ahead and save it there. All right, now we're ready to import some assets, which we're very used to doing at this point. So we need the picture of Space, and then all of the PNG files that we exported. So first we're going to bring our background layer down, and we're going to resize this because it's probably going to be way too big. So I'm going to hit scale. Let's go ahead and bring that down. I like to back out a little bit and see the space around the frame. You're going to see me do that a lot. And we're also going to be animating things in and out of the frame on this. So I want to make sure that I can see what's going on the sidelines with all my assets. So then I'm going to take these assets, I'm going to just shift select them, and I'm going to drag them down. And they're actually scaled pretty well because remember, our artboard in Illustrator was fairly small. So I knew that these weren't going to come in as super gigantic, which is actually, you know, in the end, a good thing for your computer's processing. They're a little bit big. We'll resize these in just a second. So the other thing is that, you know, these are all layered in different ways. We've got the spaceship on top, which I'll probably keep, you know, and then we have to kind of imagine what we want to do in terms of animating these. So the whole point of this tutorial is that you're going to create a little world for your viewer to kind of experience. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to scale these down a little bit. They don't need to be so big. And you can also click directly on a layer to select it as well. Sometimes it gets a little bit tricky with these transparent layers because if there's a transparency, then it might go through to the next layer and select it. The spaceship's actually pretty good. This is the moon. Scale that down a little bit. Asset UFO needs to come down. So what I want you to do is just kind of go through and place your assets in a certain way that makes sense to you, that you would like to see them arranged. So I think what I'm going to do is we've learned some really basic movements, right? I'm going to have the spaceship fly through the composition this way. I'm going to have the UFO rise up and come back down. And then I'm just going to apply some basic wiggling to these particular assets. I'm going to have the moon be a little lower. I think I'm going to make this sort of moon-looking planet a little smaller just to have a variation of scale. And I might take the opacity down on this one a little bit. So if I toggle up and back down, I'm going to see that opacity there for that planet. Just take it down a little bit. Kind of pushes it back. This one I think could maybe even go a little smaller. And maybe take the opacity down. So I'm going to flip up my little transformation, toggle down menu, take that opacity, put that a little down. They kind of look like ghost planets a little bit, right? Okay, so I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a wiggle rotation applied to both of these planets. I will need to adjust that because if I just throw a wiggle transformation on them, they're going to do exactly the same thing. And I want it to be a wiggle rotation. You can also drag and drop effects right on assets here on the canvas. I don't think I've quite done that yet. Again, I'm trying to show you different ways of doing the same thing. So as a preset, you see these are wiggling the same. So I'm just going to come down, and I think for the smaller planet, I'm going to bring the wiggle amount down to maybe like 12. And then the speed will come down. These can get really little and hard to see, so I'm going to do 0.5. Sometimes you can just click on it and type the number instead of using the slider capability. Okay, the moon. I think the moon could maybe have a bit of movement, like maybe I want to move it from this position to this position, because even though we wouldn't see it in space like this, maybe it would have some movement. And remember, this is animation, so you can kind of do whatever you want. It's a made up place. So I'm going to go to the beginning of my comp, toggle on my position. We're going to start the moon there, and then by the end it's just going to slowly move this way. And I would like to, let's see, if I give it an extra point, so we'll have the moon kind of end here, but I'm actually going to go right into the middle of the comp. Now I'm going to give the moon a little bit of an extra movement, like so. And then I'm going to actually round that out. So if I take my selection tool and I double click on this, you're going to see it's not round, it's a very sharp sort of angle. What we're going to do is you're going to come up to your pen tool and you're going to select a tool. So click down and you'll see this menu pop up, Convert Vertex Tool. And this should convert this to something more rounded and something that I can adjust a little easier. So what you're going to see now is that these handles up here, and you remember these from earlier tasks that we've completed. So now we've got a nice round movement for that moon.